for some reason, while I'm walking in the forest, I think it had to do with the panic that I started feeling because I didn't know where my friends are or what's going on or where's north, where's south. Um, I started feeling like I should be running.
Wow.
And
Oh, fuck.
it was a very physical feeling. I had no explanation for it, but I started running, and I'm running in the forest. And if you know how running in the forest feels like, you lose your orientation even more faster and faster now.
Welcome to TripTease, the Psychedelic Confession Chamber. This is a podcast dedicated to trip reports, stories, and discussions about mind-expanding experiences. Yes, so we are on.
Yeah.
What have you been doing, Pini, since
Wow.
we got, haven't seen you much lately.
Yeah, it's been a very busy time past few
Okay.
months. Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
we're
really?
working on a lot of projects at the same time. Yeah, so we keep seeing each other and talking about things.
Yes, yes. But this is the first time we're actually just like more, I don't know if more chilling than other times, but we are just here to talk and tell stories and yeah.
We're not trying to build anything, just to
Yes.
share. Yeah, it's
We're just
nice.
trying to enjoy the fun and the interesting part of like what we are talking about. So yeah, we are into we could call it psychedelic activism, psychedelic public info.
I like to call it community. I think that's the word I'll be using.
Yeah, and in many ways, it's definitely trying to build somehow a community around this concept. Around it's not a concept, it's a thing, it's a world, it's a lot of things. We're gonna touch on a little bit of it today. Yeah. So everybody, welcome to TripTease. This is a podcast that is dedicated to trip reports, and obviously, when you talk about tripping, about psychedelic stuff, there's a lot of other things that come.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here and share some of my trips and some of my stories, and to find out together with you what's gonna come out of these stories. Possibly some integration even.
For people that may not know what integration is, do you care to elaborate just a little bit? Give a short version?
Yeah, so the short version is integration is the process you do with your psychedelic trip story after it. It's the process of understanding it, of learning from it, of breaking it down and building it back up again as part of your day-to-day life, and not just as some distant experience that you've been through and now you're back.
Yeah, so basically, in a quite literal way, you're trying to integrate whatever it was that might be beneficial or challenging even in a trip you had, and trying to understand what it means for your daily life and what can you take from it for your improving habits.
For whatever it may be, for whatever intention you may have brought with you.
Right.
So you can complete that with some of the integration afterwards.
Yeah. So here in this podcast in TripTease, we actually are in some way doing at least a little part of integration for some people, and I had already a lot of guests telling me their trips, and quite often people realize stuff that they haven't realized about the experience they had, even if sometimes it's years later. So that's that's first of all just cool, and then also it could be actually beneficial for people. So
Yeah, just sharing your story and whatever information you already have from a certain trip could be very, very helpful for yourself to understand the bigger picture, but could also be helpful for someone else who might be going to do something similar, and then the information could be helpful. So there are more elements to psychedelic conversations and sharing than integration. Integration is usually the psychological process of fitting it back into my life.
yes.
But sharing is a very, very big part of psychedelics for me. I think it's a part of psychedelic harm reduction. It's a way that we minimize risks just by being able
Right.
to talk about these things and being able to share them with other people. And also, the information that we share could be very helpful, sometimes even life-saving. But it's also, I think, one of those pillars of community that we were discussing before. I think that psychedelics form communities around them.
Yeah, in most cases, psychedelics are something quite social. There is a thing about like trips that I've done in like in a group, that it was like an actual like group plan, and we did it as a group. So there's always a part in the end when you're coming down that everyone is just sharing their like impressions, and
It's almost an integral automatic part of doing something so crazy, like
yes,
expanding your consciousness together with other people.
yeah, so,
Once you come back, the discussion about it, the confirming to yourself that you're
yeah,
back and you're here and you can talk and you can share about it.
yeah,
I think it's a big part of it. It's also, if you take a look in all the original contexts of using psychedelic substances, it's not almost ever done alone. It's either done as part of healing between a healer and someone who's
right,
getting treatment, or it's done as a social, cultural, community event or festival sometimes. And I think that modern day psychedelics try to imitate and maybe to fill in the gaps that are left by the fact that we don't have the community to do it with. Some of the interesting facts that we found in research that I was doing with the Israeli government about parties is that a very large percent, above 75% of the people who go to raves and answered our questionnaire said they felt like this was a brotherhood or a community for them.
yes.
And I think that that's something that resembles for me many different facets of the psychedelic experience. It's always surrounded by other people.
So you gave us a bit of a like overview about the idea of psychedelics and friendship, community, people, and stuff like that. And now we're gonna get back into the integration part, which is a part of that. It's a small part of this idea, and also in a way, it's a part that's been proven to be very integral and very useful for therapeutic. I need to learn how to say that word. Therapeutic kind of uses, and maybe you can tell us a bit about your your interest and what you do with that part of the psychedelic world.
So in the past few years, integration has become a very hot word in psychedelic conversations, and it can mean a million different things. Like I said before, what I mean by integration is that period after a psychedelic trip, whether right at the end of it or right adjacently after it, or in the process of time after it, in the months or even years to come after it. Making sense of the experience and finding the way to integrate the experience in my life, in my meaning in my life, in my actions in my life, in my choices in my life, in the lifestyle that I choose. These are all integration to me. And like I said before, psychedelics happen well in groups, and I think that integration happens well in groups as well. And that's why a few years back we started different sharing circles and integration circles, whether in person or when COVID hit us on Thank You Plant Medicine platform, which is a big community on Facebook with people from all over the world. We created some sharing circles and integration circles so people can join in after being in a ceremony on 4 or 5 different continents.
So people can find that online now?
Yeah, it's still on the Thank You Plant Medicine website. There are no current circles running, but there are going to be more and more different integration platforms advertised there.
Right.
But Thank You Plant Medicine was one platform that we did this. We also did this with Israeli people here in Israel. Yeah. We met in person. A lot of the psychedelic activists that are happening and activities and communities that are happening around us started from some of these circles.
Yeah, it's interesting because a place like that, a meeting like that, is a place where you meet people that are into more safe and or not necessarily safe, but people that understand the value of doing psychedelics in the right context with in dealing with it in the ways that the community has to offer, rather than people that just do it and forget about it, or
so it's always a combination of people who are either looking for like-minded people to discuss these things with, or people who are looking for more understanding and information about their experiences, and then they come for this. I think after the first or second time that people participate, they realize what integration is and how it's something worth to invest time, and it's a way to take your fun seriously, or take your healing seriously, or take your therapy seriously in another way. So usually people come in for one thing and they come out, and then they come back for the integration, but they usually come either for information or for the company, or even just for the let's be frank about it. we're talking about an underground use of substances which are illegal. So finding people who are like-minded about this in a safe way is very important as well.
We both are moderators in a big Facebook group that deals with psychedelics, and one of the challenging things to me is and through the integration circles, maybe it's slowly gonna get better, is finding people that actually are curious about psychedelics, either tried or not, but they don't know any people that they can do it with, that they can share it with me. And when I grew up in the psychedelic world, social media wasn't such a big thing. Internet was not such a big part of our life yet, and I just met like crazy people, like a couple of people that were cool that I met in India and met them back in here, and then they had this group of friends that was going to almost every weekend to some rave, like Goa trance party, and through that I got exposed, and I could be curious before I actually tried it and talk to the people and consult with them until I was ready to try it. But nowadays people look for that process sometimes through like a Facebook post.
Yeah, so
And that's
the
a bit
same
challenging.
aspect
It's
of
not the
community
same.
that we were talking about before. Today you have communities become a very virtual thing.
Right.
So when a person is looking for his community to be initiated into the use of these psychedelic substances, the way we went to parties and we grew up with
Yeah.
older friends or people around us who were already experienced, and they were showing us what's okay and what's dangerous, maybe
Hopefully, yeah.
early forms
Hopefully.
of harm reduction, and also
Right.
a lot of urban legends and
Yeah,
myths,
for sure.
a lot of stupid mistakes, but also a lot of really good-hearted intentions to teach us how to experience these experiences, right? And today people are looking for that on these Facebook groups, like we see
Yeah.
them every day. And not only
For
are they
me,
looking for the information,
yeah.
because the information is virtual,
The
they're looking for
information
the
is there.
partners. They're looking
Yeah.
for the people to be there with them. And this is, like you said, it's a complicated issue, because the person you're going to trip with is a very big part of your setting or of your context. Whatever that person brings with him.
Yeah.
If she's hot, if he's annoying, if they're your
Yeah.
friends, if they're your
Yeah.
partner, whoever that may be, there's
If
a
they're
big,
like dealing with a psychotic breakdown.
yeah,
Yes,
that might definitely affect the way you're tripping.
Yeah.
We're gonna be touching that in some of my stories, but yeah, one of the stories I'm not gonna be sharing is how a really good friend of mine almost ended either his or other people's around him's life and went really, really violently crazy for a few hours.
Wow.
And we
Yeah.
didn't know how to deal with this, but just the fact that there were a bunch of people there and we were there to talk about it and to be there with him, that made a very big difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, a community, when it's not virtual, when it's something you actually, when it's someone you know, when it's someone you care about, so even if it's going to affect your set some way, there's also a resource there. There's someone you can reach out to. There's someone you can help
Yeah.
or be helped by.
Yeah, and that's why we're gonna finish this part, because it's not the main part. It's so interesting, and I'm gonna have you on again, and maybe we're gonna start some psychedelic podcast. I don't know. I heard some rumors about
Hopefully,
it.
yeah. Hopefully,
I
so.
heard some rumors. I don't know if they're true or not. But yeah, so we can end up on this. That like the main, from what we talked about now, the main message I can say is choose your partners for your trips is very important, and try to actually know them or really get a good feel of who they are and how they are. You can always be surprised, but if you choose good people, most of the time you're all gonna have a great trip. Like
The way I describe it is, if you're gonna trip together, get to know each other first and integrate it together after.
yes, that's the best. Yeah. So yeah, we got straight into a lot of things that has to do with psychedelic activism and psychedelic education, the stuff we are dealing with, and yeah, maybe it would be nice if you also tell us a bit about yourself, like what's actually you're doing a bit more.
Okay, so first thing is, my name is Pini Baumol. I've trained as
Pini.
a social worker, and I deal with all kinds of aspects of psychedelics, whether in research, harm reduction, in education, building training programs, doing all kinds of things that have to do with advocating for safer use and for therapeutic use.
How did you get from being a social worker to deciding you wanna dedicate your career, or at least for now,
Yeah, so
more into
it
this
basically
work?
happened together, because
Okay.
I went through some pretty intense psychedelic phases while I was in social work school.
Okay.
And while I was in social work school, I focused on policy work as my track. So I studied how to create social change through policy change, through community work, through the what's called macro lens of social work. Um, so I was still doing some social work, whether in the welfare office or doing it with the elderly people in an old age home. But I was always focused while I was training already on figuring out how we can use psychedelics for therapy, what we can learn from psychedelics about community, about policy change, about network building, how do we create better drug policy in Israel and around the world. Also, towards the end of my years in college, I actually lost a friend in a rave due to really bad harm reduction practices.
Oh, wow.
And I wasn't there in person, but it was something that impacted not only where I was going emotionally and mentally about this, but also a few weeks later, I was in the government drug committee for the first time, there to protest and say what I feel about what's happening, and to claim that the scientists and the politicians and the regulation makers and policy makers and also the people in the field that are using substance, we all know very little about psychedelics, and we all should be educating ourselves and each other much better. So that's how I started working also with some of the government side of this and also some of the research side of this, mostly through a harm reduction lens.
Amazing. Okay, anything else you want to add about yourself biographically,
Yeah,
about
so I have
your
31 nieces
activity?
and nephews, and they all
Okay.
live in the West Bank. And I grew up pretty orthodox. I think similar to you.
Yeah.
We might find some of my stories connected to that as well. That's why I'm bringing it up. Um, yeah, and I think growing up the way we did in the times that we did, and opening up our lives from where we grew up into maybe mainstream Israeli society or even far beyond mainstream, because
Yeah.
we're kind of fringe already.
Yeah, I think when I started understanding what is my more lifestyle kind of community from being religious was going to a rainbow gathering. That was how I started to okay, there's something cool beyond the world I know. So yeah, I think I went pretty much directly into
Yeah, so it took
into
me a while to get
underground
there. It took me a few years.
society. But I was older when this all
Yeah.
happened to me, I
Yeah.
think.
Actually, the first story that I wanted to tell you was in a World Rainbow Gathering in Germany. So this was a few years back, and it was in Germany, and I was going from one rainbow gathering in Poland to the other one in Germany, and it was really nice. For those of you who don't know what a rainbow gathering is, it's just a bunch of sweet hippies in the forest trying to
Yeah.
live together for a month without
Yeah.
killing each other and running out of weed.
Right, and sometimes it could get cray-cray, but usually it's just very fun and nice and naturalistic.
Yeah, when the right people are there and when the good energies are there, it's one of the best experiences I've ever had.
Yes.
And it can be also one of the worst I've had on the other side.
Maybe we say just a bit more about rainbow gatherings is that they're not a production, they're not done by any company or a bunch of producers or anything. It's one of the only things I know that happens that it's running, that it's an ongoing event that happens once or twice a year in many countries.
Yeah, there's
That
basically a
is
rainbow
just made by the
somewhere
community.
all the time.
Yeah, and it's just made
yeah.
by the community. Really, usually, obviously, there's some people that are a bit more take charge in the community, but there is no one in charge.
Yeah, so
really.
so the two main things I would summarize a rainbow as there's a if you see a job, if you see a mission, it's yours, meaning that you take responsibility and you
Yeah.
create things. And the other one is that the more you give, the more you get. That's what we sing when you put the money in the magic hat. And I think those things, they stayed with me, even though some of the rainbow gatherings I've been to were really not so wholesome and friendly and nice.
Yeah, they get weird sometimes. It's just because it's such an open thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
It can get quite chaotic, even though the anarchy in the base of it is something that I appreciate and not something that I'm afraid of.
And most of the time it works. So,
yeah.
So yeah, you started setting the
So-
setting.
So
in Germany,
imagine
rainbow
a German forest on top of a nice mountain with about 400 or 500 sweet international hippies, a few teepees, a main fire and a kitchen in the middle, all in a meadow surrounded by forest.
Yes.
And I was there I came there alone, and I met a few Israeli friends there, and then I met a few international friends, and then someone asked who wants to join me for LSD day, and I said I'll do that, and let's say I did. Um, what happened is that very quickly the group of three or four of us separated, and this was maybe 5 or 10 steps into the forest from the edge of the meadow. So moving from a very open clearing where you can see everyone and see everything into a quite dense forest. In the beginning, it was really nice, and when I mean it was nice, I was already past the peak and I was able to walk, and it was quite a strong LSD tab that we were doing, or tabs. Um, once I caught myself, once I caught up to the fact that I'm alone in the forest, I also remembered it was a German forest, and for a Jewish boy growing up to four grandparents survived the Holocaust, German forests have really bad context. um,
They are kind of like if you had a time machine and you traveled, let's say 70 something years back,
yeah, so
not the best place to be.
that's basically what I felt was happening. um, for some reason, while I'm walking in the forest, I think it had to do with the panic that I started feeling because I didn't know where my friends are or what's going on or where's north, where's south. Um, I started feeling like I should be running.
Wow.
And
Oh, fuck.
it was a very physical feeling. I had no explanation for it, but I started running, and I'm running in the forest. And if you know how running in the forest feels like, you lose your orientation even more faster and faster. And I felt like not only am I running, something is chasing me. And what was chasing me were dogs and people with guns. And I basically time traveled. And it was, whether it was in my imagination or in reality, I was running for my life. And running for my life, feeling the fear of being Jewish in a place where being Jewish is punishable by death.
Yes.
Every part of my body, which some of my body was already in combat mode in the past, but everything lit up. And I was full blazed in combat survival mode, running through the forest there. I think eventually I kind of wore myself out, and I kind of decided to rest slash hide behind some bushes, and I did that, and I just put my head down for a second, and the trip itself, the LSD effect was just so intense suddenly, from stopping to run and then sitting down, just like the blood flooding my body. And
Wow, yeah, everything is
when
pumping.
you just sit down, everything starts to move and shift, and I felt like I'm traveling forward back in time, except I wasn't sure if I'm traveling back to where I am right now. So it was kind of like being washed up by this wave of myself. And then I take a few deep breaths and I'm reminding myself, okay, remember a zillion trillion
Yeah.
years ago when you took LSD and this whole story started? That's probably what's happening now. I'm like, okay, but still I don't know where I am. And what do I do now? So I'm sitting there and I'm kind of like recuperating a bit and pulling out some thorns that got stuck while running in the forest, and I'm taking a drink of water. I'm basically just calming myself down, and then I hear a raven, or a crow, one of them.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't
And I
really
can
matter.
never tell the
For
difference.
Israelis, they're the same because in Hebrew it's the same word. But
Yeah.
and this was never an animal that I was connected to before, but this calling sound to me like it was calling me home, and
Really?
I started making the same noise, and I was cawing back at that raven, and what happened was, from one it became three or four, and they just sat down in front of me, and then they, because because the LSD effect, they started multiplying. So everything around me became crows, like some kind of creepy scene from a movie, except they were all my friends. And this
Nice.
whole clearing, in the small clearing in the forest where I'm resting, becomes filled with crows and ravens, and they're gray or black or blue, and they're huge or small. There's a bunch of them, and they're all super friendly to me, and they're saying like, "Yeah, we remember you're here." And then one of them started hopping, and I got up and I started following him. And 2 minutes later, I just hit the main path that was, I don't know, probably 20, 40 meters away from where I was sitting the whole time. but seemed so impossible to find.
Yeah, you had no idea.
So I get up, and this raven's showing me the way back to the path. And then a friend of mine that started the trip with me, she just runs back and she sees me. Oh, how you doing? And isn't this the most amazing trip we're having? I'm like, no,
They didn't.
I'm really really scared. Can you
Ah,
show me the way back home? Because she was having her own trip, somewhere else in the forest, and she was talking to, I don't know, the elves of the forest and the animals, and it was like this amazing
she
fairy
got
tale
even
trip.
more lost. Like,
Yeah, she had this amazing fairy tale trip, and I was running from Nazis until the
crazy.
ravens showed me back. And yeah, to today, I consider this bird as a kind of a companion, a friend of mine.
Wow.
Yeah, she gave me a hug and
Nice.
she took me back to my tent and she helped me calm down, and it was amazing. And it turned out to be an experience where I connected with a lot of trauma, but I also found a lot of inner resources and inner strength, and
Yeah.
the ability to define present from past is something that's very, very important for me as a PTSD person, because past
Right.
and future and imagination are very, very different from present. And if we take that as something that I learned there, that the present is very, very separate from the past, even though the past was very, very painful and it's still very affecting the way I am in the present.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I think a lot of anxiety and a lot of stuff like that come from like mixing up. You're not even aware of it sometimes, but you are
mhm.
just like triggered because something that happened to you in the past, and then all of a sudden you feel like that again because it's just unresolved somewhere
Yeah.
inside you. Yeah.
Another sentence I remembered after that trip was that when I was talking to myself on the ground, when I was sitting down to kind of rest or hide. I was like, "You're on the ground. You can't fall any more from here. You can't fall any deeper. You're all as flat as
Yeah.
you can get."
Yeah,
And that's
that's a
something
good
I've used
feeling too.
a lot of times since then. Just being grounded, just being connected to the earth for a second and sitting down or
Yes.
breathing.
So that's a great harm reduction tip. It doesn't
Yeah.
not necessarily always gonna work, but yeah, sometimes it works
Yeah.
great.
You can always trust the ground to be there.
Yeah, right, exactly. So
As
there's
long as you don't
something.
try jumping into it with your head
Yeah,
first.
yeah. The friend here that he told that somehow like peeing on himself in the shower helped him reground, like
Yeah.
the warm feeling of pee on his leg.
Yeah.
But that's like a more, yeah, more like universal. So, like you don't have to pee on yourself.
You
Like
don't have to
first,
pee on yourself.
first try
If
and
it
touch
helps,
the
that's
ground.
fine. I'm not judging.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
the ground
Yeah,
is a great place to start if you're feeling bad.
yeah. It's
I once told my girlfriend on one of our joint trips, that way's up, this way's down. Everything else is all
yes.
around. Forget it.
Yeah,
Just
exactly.
up and
Like
down. That's enough.
it could happen that you're not feeling gravity anymore while tripping, and it could be amazing and it could be terrifying. But usually, gravity is a
It's
pretty
something you can
constant. It's
trust.
almost always
Yeah.
there, and it's something you can connect to
Yeah, and
ground
this might
yourself.
sound pretty crazy to any of you who haven't tripped, but when
Yeah.
you're in this kind of state, knowing up from down is super important, and it's not obvious.
Yeah. Sometimes it's not obvious. It's just, yeah. Sometimes you're into so much uncertainty, so even like little certainties like that
Yeah.
can help somehow.
So the next story, it also touches a bit on my background.
Right. So we have historic kind of so far a bit of historical trips.
Right, and these aren't trips from the beginning of my psychedelic career. These are more maybe 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago. So I'm more informed, and I recognize different situations already than when in the beginning when I had these life transforming trips. But I think that all the three stories that I brought today, what's connecting them is the fact that they're transforming in a gentle way.
Hmm.
Beneath the big main story, there are
Yeah.
gentle shifts that are happening in me and in my
Yeah.
life
So
and in my
more
perspective.
actually kind of in a way of an actual like therapeutic fuck. By the end of this I need to learn how to say that word.
Therapeutic.
Like psychotherapeutic ways that you deal with something that you recognize, and you can
Yeah.
get into that understanding of this kind of perspective you have about life that is bothering you in that way and blah blah blah. And it's not always like the big things like God and death and life. It could be like, I understand like how like reflecting the past and the future
Or it
makes
can
me
be God and like the crazy big
yeah.
things in life, but in smaller, maybe more gentle or sometimes absurd or funny
Yes.
situations.
Yeah, I love that.
So this is a good one. This is a story from actually from a therapeutic session that I was the patient in an underground session, um, and this was a mix of very potent psilocybin mushrooms. It was about 3.5 to 4 grams mixture of
That's yeah.
6 or 7
Nice.
different kinds of mushrooms together, and they were
Whoa.
blended by me and into chocolate, and I ate them, and it was something that was very important for me to be like the person giving to myself this gift, and I arranged for this session to happen in a way that I was really held
So
well and
basically, you did
protected.
a bring your own.
I did a
I did a bring.
BYOB.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Some places it's legal.
Yeah.
Um, what happened during this session was that I met, it was 5 different kinds of mushrooms, not 7, and there were 5 different female goddesses that I met, each for a
Wow.
lesson and a story, and it was very vividly visual. For the first maybe 3 hours of
And
this
you were in
session,
a room just with another person.
yeah, and for
Yeah.
the first 3 hours, I was with my eyes closed, blindfolded, laying down in a completely different world. So it was very strong and it came up pretty fast. And then after meeting the first goddess who showed me the way in, basically she offered me to stay outside and enjoy the show from the outside, or to go in with her, and she showed me some way in. And then I met another goddess, and each time there was some kind of lesson. It was some kind of trick being played on me, or game being played with me, or something like that. And each of these lessons I later wrote down in my integration process, but they had to do with different aspects of my life. And it was after the third or fourth um, encounter, and it was like a kind of like a fantasy story, like a Dragon and Dungeons. I was going here, and then this happened, and then I was going there, and then I met her,
So
and
it was like a very vivid psychedelic dream, like a
it was
very
as if I
lucid dream.
as if I dropped into a computer game that was that I'm the main character of, in this fantasy world where you meet mushroom goddesses and
Yeah.
they teach you things. And it was pretty crazy. I mean, it was, even for me, it wasn't my first or even 20th session with mushrooms in my life, but it was very visual. And also the fact
So
that I
how
was,
did the environment look like? Do you remember that?
it kept changing. There was like medieval fortresses and walls at sometimes. Some of it happened in the air. Some of it
Just in
happened just like in a
nice.
different sphere, in a different space. Um, but after the third or fourth, I had to pee,
Okay.
and I get up, and I walk the 6 to 8 steps across to where the toilet is, and I'm still mid lesson. Okay, I'm staring at this beautiful goddess, even though I'm walking and I see the walls in front of me, but she's right there in front of me, and she's basically drifting in front of me while I'm walking to the bathroom. And we just met. I didn't even get the rules of this game yet. I didn't understand what's the lesson here yet. And I'm going into the bathroom, and I'm standing above the toilet, and I'm preparing to pee. And while I'm doing this, a second loop of thought, together with feeling,
Yeah, you open another tab that
yeah, another
you
tab,
sometimes can do that in
another tab opens,
psychedelics.
and the tab that opens is a very loud one. It says, "You're not allowed to do this," and you're not allowed to do this, meaning you're not allowed to have holy thoughts in the bathroom, because that's
Mm,
something that I, as an Orthodox Jew growing up,
yeah.
you're not allowed to think about
Yeah, that's a
holy
very
thoughts or holy
esoteric
things, and
thing.
it's just like a
Yeah.
little detail out of Judaism,
Yeah,
which
I
is
remember that
amazing,
too. Yeah.
that it just jumped out in that second, and I was feeling shame and guilt and whoa, what's going on? All these mixture of feelings while I'm in the presence of this amazing being who's, I mean, she wasn't one of many goddesses. Yeah, these were all representations of the goddess, who is just the female aspect of a god, which is the rest of them. I mean, that's how
Yeah.
I see it in the end. And I had this moment where all this blame or bad feeling that I'm doing something wrong, it stopped for a second, and then I just look up at her, and she was like above me. I was like, "Do you mind?" is this okay? And she's like, oh, you can talk to me anywhere. This doesn't matter to me. Are you kidding me? She's like, I'm a mushroom. We're the goddess of crap and death and all kinds of weird stuff. I mean, you can talk to us wherever you want. And this was as if God is saying to me, I'm not that mean old man you thought I was.
Yeah,
I can dress up as a mushroom goddess and talk to you about
yeah,
shit. And that was a very, very
yeah.
strong
And
moment.
also, it's about like, yeah, this like a lot of things that like this has to come from the religious world, but I guess you have it in all kinds of like communities growing up. There is teaching kids all kind of guilt about their own selves and their own
Mm-hmm.
nature and their
Yeah,
own
yeah.
bodies and stuff like
This
that. And
habitual
this is,
thinking that we
yeah,
bring
and
in.
this is a more like organic, harmonized kind of, yeah, like
So
more
so
complex
let me
kind
tell
of,
you what happened
yeah,
with this lesson, because I'm standing there, and she said, "Okay, you can talk to me, but now I'm gonna talk to her, and I want to know what's this lesson, right?" So I'm like, "Okay, thanks for the okay. What's the lesson?" She's like, "Stand up straight." And this is like something my mother used to say a lot, or we were told as young boys,
yes,
stand up straight or sit up
yeah.
straight, But she said this in a very very nice tone. It's like, "Stand up straight." And I'm like, "Okay, I'll stand up straight. Is that the lesson?" She's like, "Smile." I'm like, "Okay, I can do that." So I'm standing there, I'm smiling, I'm doing all this. I'm waiting to hear the lesson. I'm like, "Okay, when I finish doing everything she says, she's gonna teach me
Yeah,
this beautiful lesson." And then she's like, "Okay, so you stand up." I stood up straight and I'm smiling, and then she's like, "You can pee now." And this wasn't like another demand. It was just like a comment. She's like, "You
yeah.
can pee while we're doing this." And it's like, "Okay." So I start peeing. And she's like, "Now say thank you." And I'm just standing there like an idiot, smiling. My entire face is smiling, and I'm standing up straight, and I'm peeing my life out, and I'm so thankful and grateful. And she's like, "Every
Yeah,
time you pee, stand up straight, smile, and say thank you." And saying
that's
thank you
awesome.
becomes saying thank you for your body, and saying thank you for your situation, and saying thank you for just for this brief
Yeah,
break in the day where
yeah.
whatever you were doing, now you're peeing, so you're taking a break for a second. It was something
Yeah,
that
and
was
actually,
so,
like sometimes to pee is like just regardless of anything, it's cathartic and it could be a great
especially
feeling
on a
of
psychedelic
relief.
trip, it can be very, very
Yeah,
fun or interesting or intriguing or weird. I was thinking about it afterwards. I mean, basically, growing up as religious Jewish boys and girls, we learned that when you go to the bathroom, you're not allowed to think about it. But then after you go to the bathroom, you wash your hands and you say a blessing, which is thankful for all the things that happened to
yeah,
you.
there
And
is that.
there's this aspect of being grateful, and there's this aspect of being happy that I
Yeah,
just for the first for the first time maybe connecting to my body in ways that we were taught that are dirty or not good in a very very wholesome way. And I have to say that since then, every time I pee, that's how I pee. It happens every
nice.
time, and I don't work hard to do it. It's just
Yeah,
that's the way it works now.
yeah, nice.
Yeah.
So you chose to tell about the lesson of this goddess. What about like
The other
since?
ones were for different aspects of my life, and they were important lessons. They weren't as theatrical or funny, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
So I
This one
remember
is
this one even more. And this one was really it was a culmination of a few of the other ones, because they were all these female parts of me. And that entire session, those five goddess lessons, they ended up being the little girl that I was never, because I'm a boy.
yeah,
So I met this little girl that lives inside me, and she's
yeah,
just like
crazy.
she's me, and she's all of them, and she's this goddess, and she's God. She's a divine part of me. Um, and actually, in my integration work, I took her as kind of this internal guide to having more fun.
Mhm.
Because if I was a little girl, that's what I would want. I want to enjoy my life, and that's what she's teaching me. Um, and I think that she's more resembling of this goddess from the bathroom story, because
Right.
there was a humoristic, non-judgmental, really
Yeah.
really cool vibe there, as opposed to some of the other lessons, which were one of them was kind of like a angry grandmother more, and one of them was more like a nagging old person that was making fun of me until I learned the lesson, and it was, and one
Oh,
of them,
that sounds
and one of them
interesting.
was like this beautiful, beautiful, like attractive warrior princess who just wants me to stay out of the gates with her instead of going into myself, and it was like a temptation, and I really felt that this entire trip was a journey into myself to connect different parts of me, and they took female form because that's some of the energy that I was missing and I was looking for, and whatever.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really interesting thing that the psychedelics, yeah, they have just like some really weird, yeah, creative ways that you like kind of interact with stuff, that you see stuff, and I believe it's more coming from inside of us, and the mushroom somehow just awakens it or
Hmm.
something. But yeah, either if it is all kind of these
Entities.
entities,
Yeah. Sorry.
or if it's just like some archetypes in your mind, it doesn't
Hmm.
matter. But it's amazing how interesting scenes become, like sometimes when you're in that experience, and also how very meaningful, very deep, very profound stuff also gets always, or not always, but quite often, this very weird, humoristic, comic, satiric
Hmm.
twist or absurd.
Yeah.
Many of the time, you understand the most like clear thing in your life, but the whole scene is absurd.
A
So
cosmic
that's,
joke. Yeah.
yeah, so that's kind of like a really cool place to be, because your perspective is very wide. Basically,
Hmm.
that's what happens, I believe, in
I
many
think
ways.
it also has to do with the fact that humor is and laughter and funny things are a way that we also bypass sometimes, but also the way that we experience some emotions, not only the fun ones. Laughter can be a way to release stress from our body, and when in times that
Right.
when you're in psychedelic spaces, sometimes the tensions in your body come out as different um, emotional reactions. So you can be crying instead of throwing up, or throwing up instead of crying, or laughing instead of moving, or moving instead of.
Yeah.
It can be very, very confusing. But if you keep track of, or keep score of what's happening with the body and what's happening with the mind, sometimes you can really see that. Um,
Yeah, and definitely, but definitely a lot of laughter on psychedelics is, yeah, is actual like fucking
yeah,
hilarious shit.
it
That,
also depends what
yeah,
substance you're on. I mean, it's usually pretty difficult to laugh while you're shooting through hyperspace on DMT. But
yeah,
when
but it could
but
be
it can
sometimes.
happen. Yeah, it can
Yeah,
happen. But mushrooms have a very, very common effect of causing people to both look at things with humor and also just physically to laugh
yeah,
at things.
that's awesome. I love it. Like I think if psychedelics experience didn't have so much like weird humor in them, I wouldn't like it as much. I don't think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, I think some of the comedians I like the most at least tried psychedelics or are real psychonauts. I really connect to this kind of. It's not that their jokes are psychedelic, but
No,
somehow the
the
perspective is a bit
perspective that they have.
more
Yeah.
free and loose
Yeah.
to enjoy this very weird, funny stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Flexible stance.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if any comedian that likes psychedelics and likes to promote psychedelics is watching this, please talk to me, Ari Shafir, Shane Moss, like these motherfuckers. Hopefully, I'm gonna have them someday soon. Yeah, Pini was checking off like the two stories he told already. Is a very, very responsible and very organized psychonaut. So I like
Wow.
people like you.
I wish I could say the same about myself.
Man, in many ways you are. Your girlfriend is here. What do you think? Is he a organized psychonaut?
I'm not an organized dishwasher. You can know that.
So yeah, we are got to our final story, the third story.
It is actually it's a very short story, but it has a lot of context, so I thought it would be a good match. Um, so we were talking about mushrooms and we're talking about LSD, and the substances that I'm going to talk about now are very different in the way that they're very quickly effective, and they have quite short but intense trips with very long and intense integration periods. and that would be DMT, which is usually known for being part of ayahuasca, but it can also be consumed and vaporized on its own, and 5-MeO DMT, which is a different, very different kind of
You did
substance
both of them at the same
DMT.
session.
And this is the story I'm gonna tell. Yeah.
Oh,
So
fuck.
these are basically the two
That's a
strongest
rare
substances.
occurrence in
Yeah,
even in
yeah.
the hardcore psychedelic world.
So what I want to say first of all is that I did this very carefully. But
Okay.
like you said, I'm quite organized about my psychedelic experiences. But the other thing is, and this will come in also in the story itself, what I did was combine them very, very slowly and very softly. Um, First this one and then that one and then again a bit of this and then a bit. And when I did that, I basically built up the situation. Okay, so I
Built
built
up a spaceship, man. That
Yes,
was
so I
basically
built
what
up-
you were doing, yeah.
yeah, I built the rocket up and then I shot out. And when I shot out, it was quite interesting. And it also ties back to the first trip with the crow and raven because, well, I'll start with the story and then you'll hear about it. So this setting was a very friendly, nice house. There was a nice pool there and a bunch of friends who were doing acid all day. And towards the evening when they were coming down, I had a little bit of mushrooms the morning before that, but after everything was calming down, we decided maybe it's a good time to try some DMT. And they were going to smoke changa, so I didn't smoke changa because I wanted to vape DMT together with 5-MeO DMT. And 5-MeO DMT doesn't go well with changa because it has MAOI, which can cause serotonin syndrome together with.
What's a serotonin syndrome?
Serotonin syndrome is what happens to your body when you use the wrong kinds of psychedelics together with the wrong kinds of other psychedelics or medication. And this is the way that some people get to the hospital when they use psychedelics. So if you're, let's say, if you're using SSRI, which are a very, very common anti-depression medication,
Right.
and you mix that with MDMA, which is also a serotonin-based substance, what you get there is a dump of serotonin in your brain, and then the body's normal natural mechanism is kind of out of balance, and what that can cause is in rare extreme cases even death. Okay, so this is the kind of substances that you don't want to combine together. On the occasion that I was talking about, the mixture of DMT together with MAOI is usually common. It's okay. It's called ayahuasca or in different versions of changa. But mixing the 5-MeO DMT together with this MAOI is not a good idea. So put the harm reduction information.
Very advanced harm reduction
This
tips
is just-
here.
Yeah, and
This is
and
for
all of
the-
this is just what I know currently. Some of this can be proven tomorrow morning to be wrong. So if you know better, please tell me.
Right, yeah, in the comments, if anyone has like such a, went so far to, into check that, but don't check it.
This was not the first time I've done it, and it shouldn't be the way to do the first time or a few first times, I think, for the substance. This substance should be treated as something that, like I said before, it might be 15 minutes in real time, but the integration of it is maybe a year at
Yeah, and
least.
it could
or
feel
half a
like
year at least.
forever in
It
real
can feel
time
like
as well.
forever, and it's afterwards you have very strong afterglow for days to weeks to months even, and it's a very strong substance. It reboots a lot of different loops in the human system. That's how I see it. It kind of straightened me out in all kinds of ways. And what I did is basically vape small amounts of DMT from one pen and then small amounts of 5 from the other pen. And I maybe
Bro,
alternated
yeah.
3 times in 15 minutes or so. And what happened there was almost immediately with the first puff of DMT, I had this very clear vision of kind of like a tornado, like a twister. You know, remember that movie Twister? Except upside down. So it was like a upside down
Like
twister.
more
It was
a
getting.
pyramid.
It was more of like a cone-shaped storm.
Right.
Okay, and it was amazingly colorful. It was like one thread that's just going around and around in a spiral, with like a cone-shaped spiral, and it was all of the colors of the world because this is DMT. So it's not just one color. It's like all of these colors just switching and changing, and then I take the puff from the other one, from the other pen, from the 5, and there's this upside down whirlwind that's pure white light. So I have these two whirlwinds just turning around like two of these twisters, and every time I take a puff from either side, they come closer together and come closer together, and finally after two or three puffs already, they merge. And once they merge, there's this beautiful cone-shaped spiral, which is, you can see it's like two ribbons, and one of them is completely pure white, and the other one is every other color in the world, and everything else is pitch black.
Wow.
Pitch black.
Nice.
And I see this spiraling and spiraling, and I am this spiral. Except when I reach the top of this spiral, I fly off of it like two ravens, and then I'm just circling above this spiral. And it's very similar to this tattoo I have over here, which maybe afterwards you can show. What I experienced has very little to do with what I learned here, because what I experienced was amazing beauty and strength, and maybe again those inner resources that we talked about, and inner allies and guides that I already have established the relationship with in myself. But there was also parts of me that were so amazed by what I'm looking at visually, aesthetically, that I was shocked,
Yeah.
but in a really, really good way. And there was nothing emotional happening about this. It was almost like if I was disassociated on ketamine or something. It was like I was seeing this thing, which is it's me. It's undivided from me. And it's so empowering and so powerful and crazily beautiful. And I'm just sitting there, and it's wow. So it was a wow moment, and
Yeah.
it wasn't like I'm so involved emotionally. Wow moment. It was. There's a lot of really amazing things inside there that I haven't figured out yet, and but I had this very very clear vision of how there's some substances that I take a puff, and that puff is very very significant to me. And there are other things that I take a puff and I'm ignoring the significance, but the significance is right there. And what it means is I'm killing myself, I'm hating myself, I'm not loving myself. And when I'm smoking tobacco, I'm trying to ignore the fact that I hate myself enough to want to die while I'm smoking this.
Oh wow.
Because that's what
Okay,
happens.
yeah.
Because I'm smoking, and smoking is going to kill me one day, right? And while I'm smoking it, this is what I'm understanding. As opposed to something like 5-MeO or DMT, that it's so profound, it's so strong. Just the situation that you're in, you're bringing in the substance, and one puff or two puffs, and you're able to see eye to eye with God, as opposed to being ignorant of your own death wish. It was
Yeah.
such a contrast for me.
Interesting. Yeah.
This experience sort of crystallized an understanding that I had about psychedelics, which is something that I've said in different occasions, and other people are saying it in very different ways, but we all, I think, mean similar things. That I said that we used to think that the psychedelic substance is amazing or sacred or alien technology or whatever it was when we understood these crazy things, and then maybe we grew up and then we understood that it's more about the experience. It's not even about the substance. The substance could be this or that, or fainting or breathing or whatever it may be, or sniffing glue, but the experience is what's changing us, and the psychedelic trip. And I think that more and more I'm understanding that it's not the trip, it's not the experience, it's not the substance, it's the process. And when
Yeah.
the process is right and you use the experience as a tipping point and you use the substance as a key for the tipping point, that's the peak of psychedelic use. I'm not saying the rest of it is baloney or is not good for
Yeah.
you. Or
A lot
I'm
of
just
it
saying,
is like exploration in many different ways, and just even
but
fun, recreation
but the
can be
peak
fun.
of that,
But yeah,
that's where it is.
like the most useful, the most high, the right way to do it. Like
Mm, it's
not the
it's,
right, yeah.
I
It's
think
like
the most effective,
most effective,
and
most
also
useful.
the most self-aware to itself
Yeah,
as a process. Because when we're tripping, or even when we're just human and we're not the substance itself, and we don't know what the substance is all the way, we don't really understand what a mushroom is all the way. But not only that, we don't even understand human experience all the way.
yeah,
So saying that we understand human experience on mushrooms is something that we can say we're not so sure.
yeah. But somehow it can help us because it sometimes brings forward some stuff in human behavior that are it brings up a lot of like what people call, all the hidden sides
Yeah,
of
the shadows.
consciousness and all the shadows and the subconscious and whatever archetypical world or all of that, and they bring them to the surface somehow. Before we finish here, this was amazing stories, and I love it also how you are bringing your integration with the story. So that's great. Every story has its own like explanation. Sometimes I need to do it for my guests, but you just took it away. Um, I wanna tell us about where people can see more about you. Hopefully in the near future there's gonna be much more. But where people can see more of things you talk about. And
Hmm. Yeah, so you can also follow my Facebook page. It's called the Oxygen or Khamtsan. You can find it on Facebook or in the links
we'll add it in
attached.
the links. Yeah.
And that's a Facebook page where I put out most of my education and harm reduction ideas and things. I also have a website called psychedelicsocialworker.net, and that's
Right.
basically where you can find more information about me. You can find some either Hebrew or English information about psychedelics and about integration and harm reduction and policy work that we're doing here in Israel. Um, you're welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn or Facebook or WhatsApp
Yeah.
and just ask whatever you feel like. But I think that more and more as time passes, the psychedelic community here in Israel and the psychedelic advocacy efforts and the different people and groups, we're coming together. So I'm usually where everyone else is doing things
Right.
together.
Also, there is videos in if you're a Hebrew speaker in the YouTube channel of Medabrim Psychedelia, which is a group we're also involved in. And there's a great lecture of Pini that I helped also film and edit. And also there's a seminar you did
There's
online
yeah,
recently,
we did a webinar with psychedelics today and David Drapkin, and you can find it the
and that's
YouTube
in
link.
English for everyone that's
It's
an
in
English
English.
speaker.
That's
You can watch
basically an
that.
hour and a half discussion about psychedelics and harm reduction and drug policy in Israel, and also my life story kind of mixed into that.
Beautiful. So if you like what Pini is talking about, go ahead and look out for his video. And hopefully soon we're gonna start a podcast, the two of us together. Maybe it's a rumor, no one knows, but
We're looking forward to it
hopefully.
anyways, yeah.
Yeah, and if you want to help fund that, so
Yeah.
let us know and fund this as well. Yeah, it's unfunded.
Yeah, and if you want to help with anything that I'm doing, I have a Patreon account up on my website. You
Go
can
for
check that
Patreon.
out.
Hopefully, we're gonna have very soon a TripTease Patreon as well, and we're gonna keep you posted. And me and Pini are gonna do some stuff in the near future. So
And thank you,
awesome.
Alan, for this. It was such a really cool, wonderful way to practice our English together and
Yeah,
practice talking about what we talk
yeah,
about in Hebrew all the time.
yeah.
And also for me, as someone I've listened to thousands of trip stories, as someone who listens to integration on a daily basis, and just telling my own stories and then like listening into them, it's another level of integration. It's another level of
Yes,
understanding my life. So it's laws to change.
exactly. Yeah, we are not like in this world. People are gonna experiment with stuff that are illegal, and unfortunately, a lot of the time they're gonna do it uninformed. And that's what we want to break. We don't tell anyone what to do. Me myself, I haven't been, even in my craziest times, I haven't been doing so much drugs, and I'm very careful, and I love talking about it, and that's very important. And what I see here is like you're a guy that experimented like very far, and I had a few people like you that experimented extremely with psychedelics, and you come back and your main message is like know what you're doing, be careful about it, choose the right settings, etc., etc.
Share
So
it, create
share it.
community around it, make a
Yeah.
life around it.
So I know a lot of people that maybe were reckless when they were younger, but they grew to know, to understand, like even not to understand that like psychedelics, that these experiences are bad. No, they could be amazing, but understand that there needs to be some kind of method and a lot of research, obviously. And why stigmatize it is like, let's say, metal tools change history forever, but they also killed a lot of people. Like, why? But are metal tools good or bad or no? They're just like very useful, powerful stuff that we have in our civilization. And now there is this that is not necessarily new, but hopefully now it's coming back or in a new way into some societies.
It's being integrated.
Slowly.
People had their trips, and
But
now they need to integrate the substances and the experiences into
Right.
their life. And part of that is creating a society that knows how to deal, whether in a harm reduction perspective or in a wiser and deeper understanding of psychedelics. Just as a group, we need to create more and more spaces for people to experience themselves and to be able to express those experiences.
Yeah. Turn on, tune in, and just tune in to here, and it's gonna be fun.